Hi there, I'm Deb Crow, and I want to welcome you to Season 4 of Imperfect, the Heart-Centered Leadership Podcast. This is a podcast where we connect, learn, and laugh together with authentic and courageous leaders from all over the globe. You will learn from leaders you haven't even met yet. You will gain new tools to add to your leadership toolkit, because leadership belongs to all of us. It is not measured by stature or title. So please pull up a chair and listen in. This is the Imperfect, Heart-Centered Leadership Podcast. So welcome back to Imperfect, the Heart-Centered Leadership Podcast. And I have one of the most flexible guests on my show today. Carly and I have been going back and forth like a ping pong game, trying to get this scheduled. So I'm so grateful for your flexibility and your patience, and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to it.
So you are in California, but you've lived in Canada, which is, I always love hearing when my guests get to visit Canada or have lived here. So you're a partial Canadian. We will officially say that to you today. And tell our guests a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm a human behavior specialist, and I focus on just assisting individuals in overcoming their challenges, things that they've gone through past and also present that are keeping them stuck. So whenever they're feeling stuck, they can't move forward, they're getting that frustration where it's like, I just want to be able to have that life that I would love, create the life that I would love. That's where I come in to just help them shift their mindset and figure out like, what's the root cause of what's going on, which sometimes is past and sometimes it's present. So we really just dive deep and do the work to get them to the other side.
And so my first leadership question is, how long have you been doing this work, and how did you come up with such an interesting, inviting kind of role for yourself and calling yourself the title that you've given?
Yeah, so I have been doing this for 12 years now. And when I think about the human behavior specialist, I wouldn't say, like, it's not therapy in the sense where we're not talking actually very much. Even though there's a great degree of talking, there's not a lot of conversation on the actual story of what occurred. We'll go in and we'll get details about something just so I could help you ask you questions to shift your perception, to balance out the mind, to balance out the perceptions. And then once we get there, there's a transformation that occurs. So since it's something that's definitely different than the traditional types of therapy, psychologies, et cetera, that's why I didn't want to have it lumped under the same name. Also, so people don't have unrealistic expectations when they get on the phone, where if they do want to just be heard and listened to, I'm actually not the person to come to. I'm going to hear you, I'm going to listen to you, and then I'm going to ask you a ton of questions and shift your perception. Yeah.
I love that. And I love that it's not so much of a segregation, but you didn't want to be lumped under that umbrella. And I love that. It's a niche. And you're also okay to say, I'm not that person for you if this is what you're looking for, which I think is dynamic. So my second question, I can't wait to get your answer on this. Why do we as human beings have such a difficult time regulating our emotions? We witness it every day within ourselves, within our family, our friends, our clients, our colleagues. What is the deep, dark etiology? Because I'm dying to hear your answer.
Yeah, so this is actually really a fun one. So we're not meant to be emotionless. We're not actually meant to get rid of our emotions. So first off, we have a lack of appreciation for what emotions are truly doing for us. Mm-hmm. Emotions are a feedback mechanism to allow us to know that our perception is off balance. And each emotion has varying indicators depending on how large it is or small it is, on how much our perceptions are actually off. The greater the emotion, the greater the misperception. It's really quite fascinating. And it's funny because we see this the most in traumas, right? So whenever we go through a traumatic experience, it genuinely is very challenging for us. But if we open it up and we see the other side of the trauma, we see the other things that occurred, because in those moments that we have a traumatizing experience, remember, it's hard to focus on what else is going on. Yeah. You know, it's really hard. And so I don't want anyone to ever have an unrealistic expectation, no matter how much you know, if you're going through something that's intense for you, you're not going to be able to work through it in the moment. There's a low probability. If you have the skills and the tools, you might be able to work through it faster when things occur, and maybe even sometimes ask yourself some quality questions in the moment. But remember, the emotions are still there to help you to understand that there's something else going on inside you. You know, depression is a feedback, anxiety is a feedback. And so it's all just a feedback. So whenever we're getting that feedback, I like to ask myself the question is, what's actually the trigger that's driving the emotion? Because nobody can make me feel a certain way. This one's fun too, because you could literally sit with two people in front of the same third party, and that third party says one thing. One person might cry and one person might laugh. And what's the difference? He or she is not making you feel any way, but it's how we're perceiving it, right? So first it's like, okay, well, what's actually bothering me? And that's the first step to actually being able to transform it, instead of being like, oh, what's wrong with me? I can't control my emotions. I shouldn't be emotional right now. And the reality is we're all emotional. We all have moments.
We are indeed. We are human beings, aren't we? I love your passion and the energy that you bring to this. And I can tell how much you love this work. And you've led beautifully into my next question, which I'm going to pause for a minute because I'm going to give you the question that I ask everybody on the show. It has permanent residency. What imperfections do you feel, not think, that you bring to your heart-centered leadership within your practice?
Yeah. So when we think about imperfections, it's funny because this is a great thing to share. Thank you. This is a great question. When we think about imperfections, it's funny because the imperfections that I thought were once imperfections, I realize are the things that actually empower us. They're the things that make us unique and the things that make us different. So I remember when I first started, because I do a lot of business consulting as well. Like I love business so much. And I love human behavior. I love business. So I love combining the two. And it was funny because when I first started, I just thought I had to look a certain way. I had to have on like the suit. I call it the boring pantsuit. No offense to anyone out there. I just have a high value on fashion. I've been reading Vogue since I was 13 years old, and we don't show normal pantsuits in Vogue. They're beautiful, but I'm like, I just can't do it. I can't do it. So I thought I had to wear the pantsuit. I thought I had to like have a cleaner haircut, like be just more well put together. And the reality is I'm from the San Fernando Valley, born and raised. So for any of you guys who have ever heard the song Valley Girl, it's hysterical. Listen to it. And then you'll be like, oh my God, she does say, oh my God, she's a Valley Girl. And so that part of me was something that I thought was imperfect, and I realized it's just fine. Also, just that Southern California surfer girl vibe, right? Yoga, surfer, and just being able to implement that in a professional manner. And what's really fun is I realized that that's part of my strength. And then the clients and the business owners I attract also have a different kind of edge to them. You know, like I'm probably not going to attract the very strict corporate professional, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Mine are a little bit edgier, a little bit rougher around the edges. Sometimes they swear a lot.
Well, we are a safe space, right? I always love that. Deb, can I use an outrageous adjective? You can.
Which I use
the
as
realness.
well.
It's the realness of it, right? That's what I love what you're saying. And those imperfections are truly gifts. And I mean, Brene Brown has taught us that very, very well.
She's fun.
And it's nice to hear you say who you attract, because I very much feel the same way. And I think that's just being authentic at such an untouched level.
Yeah, it's beautifully put as well. Yeah, and it's like, be yourself and you'll attract the individuals that you want to be around.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'm like you. I've never been the pantsuit girl. I have the pantsuit, but I've always aligned with who I'm speaking with. If I'm in a manufacturing environment, I'm obviously going to be wearing something casual and my work shoes. And I always do it so that there's never a level of uncomfortable. I don't want them to be uncomfortable. I'm just going to be myself. And it's not what we put on our body. It's the behavior we exude, the energy we exude. And people pick up on that. And it's really nice and refreshing to hear you say that. Mm-hmm. Now, my third question, I want to piggyback on what you just talked about in terms of trauma. So I used to be a neurotrauma case manager. I always say that I left the medical world because coaching found me. Mm-hmm. So talk about a little bit of variance and where you can come in terms of sequencing, because I have had clients go through trauma and the triggers are real and they're visceral and they're deep and they're messy and hard and nothing's linear, especially when it's wrapped, in a big box of grief. There is no bow. How does what the work that you're doing augment in terms of sequencing for EMDR therapy or talk therapy or some of the different modalities that are out there? I'd love to educate our listenership because behind all the extrinsic titles that we all have, unfortunately, we all have trauma and death and loss and stress in our life. And I just thought this would be such a great question to have you frame for us.
Yeah. And this is cool too, because even, you talk about EMDR and talk therapy as well. And this is some of the dynamics that I've seen, how it serves, even my clients when they finally get to me, then when we're working, it's like how we utilize it. EMDR has been kind of cool in the sense where like I have one client and she will do EMDR and she'll remember things that she didn't remember before. And then she comes to me and we kind of balance perceptions, right? So that's been pretty cool. I haven't tried EMDR, but I found when my clients do it, that some of the benefits that they get is we're pulling up perhaps forgotten memories and then we'll come and do some deeper work on it. So that's pretty cool. I like that. And then there's the other dynamic with talk therapy as well. It's really easy. This is what I've noticed as well. It's like really easy when we go through traumatic situations to actually forget what occurred because it is a trauma. One thing with talk therapy, part of it, I know it just really helps people to talk about it. Sometimes just that initial, like the first stage is like, I just need to talk about it. I need to get it off my chest, right? And then also it's actually, you're not forgetting it. So again, by the time they come to me, when I actually ask them to go back into that experience so we can rebalance perceptions, we don't have anything that's vague or nebulous. We can just like get right into the juice, like right in there. And then there's some components and dynamics that I've already worked through. So what we want to think about when we're clearing trauma, and I know that some people will already have an overarching experience of this, is if you've gone through a trauma in your childhood, you can see how parts of it have shaped who you are today and how it has served you. Yes. And so we can look on a long-term scale and see how it helps us. And there's a certain level of gratitude we get when we feel that and understand that it wasn't something that was just random. Like you're like, well, this actually shaped who I am today, so I'm okay with it. To really release the trauma, you actually do that same process, but see how things served you in that moment. And that's where it sometimes gets a little bit tricky because our perceptions of the experience can be so highly charged. But for example, like I was working with an individual who had gone through some sexual trauma when they were 7 years old. And what was really fascinating, as we started to go through their background and what they were experiencing, we realized that that child as an individual was highly infatuated with relationships and had no idea that what she was getting into was going to be something that was that advanced, right? So she's thinking, she's like this little girl, and she's like, I want to be in a relationship with an adult. And so once it got really deep into the process and scary, like she realized that was the moment that she got her childhood back. She had cut relationships out of her life after that. It took her forever to actually be in a relationship. She focused on her school. She focused on her study. And that's when she got the tears of gratitude, right, for that occurring. Because she could see, had that carried on continued, there was a really high probability that her life would have just looked completely different than what it is today. And she lives her life. That's the truth. We all live our life. So that's the challenging part. But when you can get those benefits in the moment and open your heart to the other part of the experience so that we can see why it occurred for us, because you are a purposeful human being. And we don't attract these situations because we're being punished. We attract them because there's a lesson to be learned. And when we understand that lesson, it opens our heart. And when you clear that in the moment, the trauma officially releases. You'll get a partial trauma release by seeing how it like shifts and transforms your life on the long-term scale. But to get that really, really juicy one, you got to get back in that moment. Yeah, back in that moment. So it's, that's when I say, like, when you have it, people come to my workshops. They also do one-on-one with me. If you can't come do one-on-one, it's totally fine. We have workshops set up for that as well, where you can crank it out in the weekend. We help you through it and stuff. Because we don't expect anyone to be able to do that right off the bat. When I say we, it's my husband and I in workshops. I don't expect you to be able to have the answers right off the bat. And especially since I've been doing it so long and my husband, like, we've gotten to see a lot of the commonalities between what this occurs. Yeah. And just helping people get to the other side of it.
Yeah, you definitely get to see some trends when you've done enough cohorts, and that's interesting the way you kind of frame that. So my last leadership question is, think about the younger version of Carly, and where's that pivotal age where we could really make an impact on perception of youth? And what what are some tools or strategies that our listeners can help, whether it's their children or a younger sibling, or what's something we can put in their toolkit to help?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah. So I actually occasionally get to work with one of my clients' kids. He's 7. He's super fun. And he's already understanding what's purposeful for him. He's already pursuing his life purpose, and he already has an idea of what that looks like. So when I say you can do it at an incredibly young age, and it's obvious, it really genuinely is. And as parents, it's paying attention to what your kids are demonstrating is important to them. Right. So and sometimes people judge their kids for video games, but I also have a client who's one of the top video game producers in the world, centimillionaire. And what was his most important thing growing up was video games. His mom nurtured it. She played the video games, wound up wanting to do coding, and now he's a creator. Right. So it's not to say it's a good or bad thing. It's just understanding what they're doing and what's important, and then linking that to their education. Right. Because you could be a video game designer. My brother, he actually does, he loves video games. He does commercials for video games where he actually plays video games and has to do it in such a specific way that whenever you see a commercial or a cool thing happening in a video game, that's my brother. Like, he does that. And then he's going to learn how to produce it and direct them, right? So he's moving up the scale. And it's a huge industry, by the way. So it's like, how do you actually pay attention to what your kids love and nurture that? And then there's education around it. If your kids love music, if your kids love sports car, if your kids love sports in general, right? Also showing them like how each of these aspects in school assist that, because they don't actually want to learn math or history. But if you link math to video games, if you link science and history to video games and show them how it help them play their games, if you show them how it help them with their sports, if they're really social, if you show them how it help them socially, then they're like, well, yeah, I want to learn this, because your kids are already demonstrating things that are massively important to them. Yeah. Massively.
I love the video game reference, because when I case managed, I would get some pedophiles with a brain injury or a spinal cord injury or sometimes severe orthopedic injury. And the parents used to say, is this unhealthy? And I said, well, we're working on hand and eye coordination, memory, attention. I think we're doing pretty good. And it's like you said, well, we can make the link to a positive, but it's like in the leadership world. Well, I do this because that's the way I was shown. Mm-hmm. And then if it wasn't done in the right way, it's okay, let's talk about the unlearn, relearn model. And there is other ways. So I think the thread through your leadership questions and the way you frame things is there's always room for self-audit. There's always room to improve. And sometimes we have to think outside the box and get creative and not have our own perceptions in the mix.
Yeah, absolutely. Because our perceptions as well, remember, as parents, we're going to inject what we perceive our kids should have to, need to do, supposed to do. Right. And what's funny is your kid's life will demonstrate what they truly would love to do. And it's really hard as parents. Obviously, there are some shoulds that we are going to hold on to. Like, please don't look both ways before you cross the street, period. There are the shoulds and the have tos that we want to uphold for sure, and that we are going to inject in their service, for that. Yeah. But then at the same time, it's like, if your kid's depressed, if they're having a hard time, then help them connect with what's important to them, because any sign of depression means that they keep thinking and comparing their life to a reality they think it should be, instead of appreciating their life for what it is. Whenever we put our life down and put the outside world's life up, guess what? That makes us depressed. Yeah. It's a natural state that we're going to be in when we're actually disowning the magnificence of our own life. Yes. So really paying attention to, when someone's procrastinating, this goes for everyone. Well, you're procrastinating, but that doesn't mean the time disappeared. What did you invest your time in instead? Exactly. And that's the thing that's more important to you than what you procrastinated on.
Absolutely.
Right? Paying attention to that, because you're already putting energy, effort, and prioritizing that. And if you can build a business on it, you can make money on it, something like that, then that's a great thing to do, because you're already prioritizing it.
Yeah, that's a good one. I always, when any of my clients tell me they're busy, I always say, what are you procrastinating on? And they're like, how do you know? And then when they actually do the task, they're like, Deb, it took me 15 minutes, but I procrastinated for 3 weeks. And I'm like, so hindsight's 2020, right? So fun. Okay, I'm going to ask you my Fab 4. These are just 4 questions. I don't want you to think, just tell us whatever is on the top of that brilliant mind of yours. Okay, first question. What phrase or word shows up in your leadership language every day?
Okay, so when I think about leadership language, so there's two things that come to mind is I like to really pay attention to when I use the language love, want to, right? Choose to, because that's very different than when I say I should, I have to, I'm supposed to, because should, have to, supposed to's are according to someone else. And so I'm really paying attention to that to make sure that I'm staying focused and connected with what's important to me. That one's a big one. And then the other thing that comes up, which I say a lot, is BJ Palmer. He's like the father of chiropractic. He's really fun. But he said, take no credit, take no blame, just keep focused on your chief aim. And I love that statement so much. And for me, it like encompasses leadership because it's not about being proud. It's not about being puffed up, take no credit, take no blame. It's not about guilt and shame. Just keep focused on your chief aim. Like stay focused on the primary objective, stay focused on your purpose. Yeah. So I feel like that just encompasses leadership.
Well, and it's that whole premise of self-directed. You know, we don't have to have that big, Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh mode. We don't have to have that. We don't have to have that obligation cloak. Like, just take that thing off, and you're not really living purposeful. So that's beautiful. Okay, second question. Name a book that you've read at any juncture in your life. What was the name of the book? Who wrote it? And why was it impactful for you in your life?
Yeah, I love books, by the way, you guys. So recently, one that I really loved was the Nike Shoe Dog book. So I forget who wrote it, which is awful because it's like the owner of the company, but I don't remember. So it's a really good book. But why I loved it is, we hear all these, you get to hear all these people talk about their businesses and stuff. And for me, it's a real gap where if I hear Elon Musk talk about his business or Jeff Bezos or Oprah or something, I'm like, we are not relatable. Like, I cannot relate to you right now. I'm not at that stage. So listening to how Nike built the company from the ground up was so inspiring to hear. You get to hear about the challenges they go through. You get to hear about the different dynamics of the personal and professional career and how things are mixing. And just listening to someone who had a vision and the process of executing it. And it gives you more of a realistic viewpoint of what it's like to grow and build a business. And it was quite inspiring to listen to. So it's recently, I think I read it a few months ago and I absolutely loved it. Loved it. Yeah.
I love books too. I do listen to audiobooks, but
same.
I love to go to the bookstore. I love to hold the book. I love the smell of the book. I love the feel of the book. It's just something I could sit and read books all day long. I align with you. Okay, my third question, let me give you a little bit of context. So I'm granting you a wish, and you get to have dinner with any leader of your choice, and this leader could be still living, or maybe this leader has passed away. Who are you having dinner with, and what is the dinner conversation?
Who are we having dinner with? It's funny because it's like, I've thought about this before where it's like, I wonder what it'd be like to connect with these people. So I might want to have dinner with maybe like Epictetus was pretty cool. I was like, because it's funny because I when I read Epictetus' stuff, I really like how he explains universal laws and technically human behavior in a really simplistic form, even though I know his bosses and people we like really connected with were Aristotle and Socrates and stuff. But at the same time, it's just not as palatable for a reader. So I love his interpretation, and I think it would just be fun to go back and forth with it for a while.
I think I'd like to be at that dinner. I haven't had anybody pick that one. That would be a very interesting dinner for sure. Yeah. And then we could probably get quite fashionable if we went back in time as well. So we would get the whole Vogue thing going, which would link back to our earlier conversation. It's been delightful to meet you. You were worth the wait. You just emit heart-centered leadership, and I can see the passion that you have found in your own life and the purpose in the work that you're doing. So I want to thank you for being on the show. I'm excited to keep in touch. And I'm going to send you my audiobook that just came out as a gift for my penance of rebooking and heightening your patience and flexibility, just as a token of my gratitude. And I'm going to ask you to finish the show by finishing this sentence for me. And again, top of mind, whatever comes to you first. Heart-centered leadership is
being authentically yourself and loving and appreciating yourself for who you are.
Thanks so much for joining me today on Imperfect, the Heart-Centered Leadership Podcast. I hope you've enjoyed the show today and have learned some new tools for your leadership toolkit from our amazing heart-centered guest. If you like the show, feel free to give us a rating and a review, and we always welcome your feedback anytime. If you're ready to master the art of heart, my new book, The Heart-Centered Leadership Playbook, is now available on Amazon, or you can click the link below in our description.